Typology friends, Ian Cron here. Yeah, once again, we're going to have at it. We're going to talk about the Enneagram. We're going to talk about life through the lens of the Enneagram, and we're going to do it with my good friend Anthony Skinner.
Ian Cron, hey man, how was Christmas?
Christmas was delightful.
Yeah?
Yes, it was absolutely delightful. You know, I had my kids here earlier, so it was just Annie and I, and we had a great time together.
And we finally got to get together.
We did. We finally got together. That was the best Christmas present ever.
We're finally back in the same city, had some space, enjoyed the holidays together. Good times.
All good things. Now, listen, Today we're going to jump in on a topic I'm really stoked about because I think actually it's a good Christmas topic. Isn't that weird? Because the topic is grief. And, you know, grief is particularly poignant at Christmas, and people oftentimes feel guilty that they feel grief at Christmas, or they feel such a dissonance around it. And we're going to be talking, interestingly, not with a 4 about grief. We're going to be talking to a 3 about grief. And so let me introduce our new friend, Steve Carter, author of the book, Grieve, Breathe, Receive, Finding a Faith Strong Enough to Hold On. Steve, welcome to Typology.
Hey, it's such an honor to be with you, Ian and Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a delight, man. All right, Enneagram 3. How'd you know? What do you love about it? What do you hate about it?
Well, you know, I think 3s and 7s are so often, and I've heard you talk about this, like misdiagnosed. And early 2000s, someone told me, oh, I think you're a 7. And so for a lot of my life, I thought I was a 7 until I realized how much joy I get from setting goals and achieving. And I think I could go back as a child, and I had goals to make it to this basketball team, make it to college basketball team. Like, just, I set them, I loved it, and I loved to win. Everything was about winning. And I had this, one day decided, and after taking the test, I realized I was an actual 3. I had this mantra: if I'm not winning, I'm sinning, because winning was everything, you know? And so
that's a 3 pastor right there.
Is right. Yeah, you know, and I came alive like by winning. I think what I don't like about it is I don't like to fail. I don't like, which doesn't make me ever want to sit with grief. I don't like letting people down. I think I've tried to be Ferris Bueller in a lot of situations. And so when I can't manage the image in first half of life, that was really hard. And so I don't like how much I cared about that in my 20s and my 30s. And so I think that's been some of the stuff, just trying to get to a healthier place and understanding of what a healthy 3 can look like.
And in your mind, what does a healthy 3 look like?
I think a healthy 3 can actually, and I have a 2 wing, which has that helper side. Obviously, I think for me that is recognizing that I'm beloved already. I'm good already. It's not in my performance. I'm not trying to earn someone's appreciation or attention or affirmation. I already have that. And so how can I just take what I love, which is setting goals and accomplishing and achieving, but how do I do that from the right vantage point, in the right frame of mind, and from the right kind of, I think, center and core. I'm also like really connected to IFS, internal family systems. And what for me is recognizing the parts work and recognizing some of those parts of me that often will take over. And that's often some of the unhealthy 3 side, the protector, the image manager. And I think just being able to be aware of it and let it have a voice, speak for it, but not from it. And I think that has been a real helpful tool for me.
I've used internal family systems a lot in some groups that I've lead, and we've had a couple of internal family systems therapists on the podcast, and they've been really, really helpful. And when you combine the Enneagram and internal family systems, it's actually really helpful. And I know some people would say that, you know, your type actually isn't your personality. It's actually just a dominating part, or, you know, in the family of voices inside, you know, exiles and, you know, managers of different kinds. And And I think there's some real validity to that. And I think it's really interesting. I don't have an answer, but I think it's really, really interesting. So I recommend that work for everybody, for sure. All right. So you've written a book on grief. Let's just talk about what grief is.
Yeah. For me, I just say honoring what comes up when change shows up. Because all grief is just change. You could have good grief. Your child could go off to college, but you're an empty nester now. That's good grief. It's how do I honor the feelings, the emotions, the weightiness of the change? And do I give it enough time to sit with?
Mm-hmm. One person, a friend of mine, and I think it's actually a quote from someone else, said that grief is the price you pay for love. Right. And that love may be for a job. It may be for another person. It may be for a dream but maybe for an animal. It just doesn't really matter. Right. Like grief is the price you pay for love, and your love may be misdirected or misguided in some instances, but still the grief remains. Right. So in your body as a 3, what does grief feel like?
Oh, that's a great question. When I've felt grief and sadness, usually it's tightness in my shoulders and neck. But when I don't know what to do, my stomach just gets so upset. It's almost like tied in knots. I think after 2018, just some of the professional life had fallen apart, and my wife and I, we moved to the desert, and I just would wake up and hike. And I felt like the only way I could actually kind of process through that grief was through walking. It's just almost the movement of it, because it messed with me. I realized I had muscles of achievement and muscles to achieve, but I did not know how to grieve. And I wasn't taught that in the church, was celebrated to perform and rise to the occasion. I wasn't taught how to hold space, even for the parts of me that were struggling and hurting.
So it's interesting you should say that, not in the stomach and in the chest, right? Because interestingly, I think it was C.S. Lewis who once said about grief, he said, no one told me how much grief feels like fear. Mm-hmm. Is that your experience, or what do you think he meant by that?
Ooh. I run it through a 3 lens, obviously. The fear of letting someone down, the fear of not making everyone happy, the fear of, just not knowing how to handle this change well. I think that I could play off a number of different phrases of where that fear could take me. But I think deep down, I don't like to not know how to do something. And so to not know how to grieve, there was fear of, will I ever get through this? Will I ever get to the other side of this? Is this just the new reality? It just felt like I was walking in a foreign land and I had never been there before, and trying to navigate my way through it. And especially when there's moments of like betrayal trauma connected to it, or there's moments of loss and hurt, you don't know if your discernment has leveled up or if your discernment just got absolutely leveled. And so you don't know how to trust yourself. And that creates a lot of internal fear of going, am I reading this right? Is this the right way to do this? Is this? And so as a 3, that I feel like that has been just recognizing, fear's okay. It's part of it. You're walking a new adventure,
Yeah, there's a term in psychology that I love, and Anthony's heard me use it a bunch, but I love it because it sounds like what it is. The term is disequilibration. It's where your entire equilibrium has been thrown off. All the presumptions are thrown out the window. All the assumptions and presumptions have been thrown out the window. And here you are exposed. And for me, the feeling of grief, just circling back to that, is just a kind of hollowness. It's the lack of, I feel like I've lost my solidity somehow, and and lostness. There's a kind of lost feeling to grief, right? So let's just circle back. What was the experience that precipitated the writing of the book and then ignited your desire to write about it?
Yep. So I had been given the opportunity to kind of follow a mentor in an incredible church and allegations came out and about abuse of power and sexual abuse. And it ended up watching leadership not probably handle it in the best way, which caused me to just resign and give up my dream job. And that just everything as a 3 I had been working for 20 plus years to get to this position. And then realizing, oh my goodness, and all of the relational pieces and fractures and all of that was just so hard. And then 8 months later, my adopted father died. And I just felt like in the midst of 1 year, I lost a spiritual father, a community, and an earthly father. And I didn't know how to grieve. And I felt like woke up one night and I just had this kind of voice that was like imparted within, just say, go to the desert and wait for instructions. And I thought I didn't think it was literal. The next morning, my wife woke up, she's making me some coffee, and I said, hey, I had this sense yesterday that we're supposed to go to the desert and wait for instructions. And she turns around, looks at me, tears up, and she goes, I've been sensing the same thing. I want to go home. And she's from Arizona. And so we ended up a few months after leaving my job, packed up and moved to Arizona. And as Eugene Peterson says, all great theology is rooted in geography. And so I just wanted to read as much about the desert mothers and fathers and try to find a way to kind of not just achieve my way out of this because it wasn't working, but to learn actually how to grieve it and see what's on the other side of it.
So when you say you went through a season of trying to work your way out of it, achieve your way out of it, what did that look like?
I go back to my childhood, and this is a question I have for you. So this at some point I want to ask this to you, but my childhood story has been kind of built around something that I've come to not to be true. And it was that my biological father bailed. And I think that played a dominant kind of part of, I have to perform or somebody else will leave. I have to achieve and be better, or for some apparent reason, that person might go. And again, kids are very perceptive. They're just crappy interpreters of reality often. And what I was perceiving is, I've got to be great. I've got to perform. And so I think that's how I channeled all of my sadness as a kid, is just work harder. Just do what you can to achieve. And so I think when I felt like I had achieved the dream job, and then all of a sudden, where was I going to go that was bigger? Where was I going to go that had more resources? I can't achieve my way out of this. There's not other places I can just go to. This is going to require me to sit in this and really do some first half of life autopsy as I enter in and prepare myself for second half of life living.
So it's interesting. You mentioned that the person that you worked for, the spiritual leader, was someone that you greatly admired, and all of that, which is interesting for the 3 because one of their hallmark characteristics is identification. So they tend to identify they will model themselves after an admired figure. And their identity can then get all wrapped around an institution, right? And so in the loss of a mentor and an institutional, connection, the 3 could go through a real season of opportunity and challenge. The challenge is, well, if I'm not this guy's mentee, if this guy's not, a person of character, and therefore, I've been being mentored by someone who's not who I thought they were, and I'm no longer affiliated with this institution. Therefore, who the hell am I? Right? So there's not just the circumstantial losses, right? Those are existential losses, right? Those are really core things.
Yeah, when I was first moved to Arizona, I remember we needed a washer and dryer, and I was home on a Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. to meet the Home Depot guy. And I felt all of this sense like I shouldn't be home. Like, what if he asked me what I do? I should tell him like what I did. Like all of this stuff is just flowing through my body. And I'm like, what is going on right now? And it's because if you told me from 2012 to 2018, what did you do Monday mornings at 10:30? I could tell you. Wednesdays at 3 p.m. I could tell you. Thursdays at 4 p.m. I could tell you. My schedule and structure was so just dialed. And it was because I think the connection and identity to the institution and the desire to please someone I respected. And then now you remove yourself from that and you're like, who's putting the pressure on me to actually go and do something? I don't have that person I'm trying to make happy, and I don't know how to get myself out of this. And then you show up somewhere and they're like, what do you do? Well, what I used to do, and then I'd go speak and everyone would always say, Steve Carter, former lead teaching pastor at, and they would just kind of like my best life was behind me, which only just created that kind of existential frustration of, can I be me without the institution? Can I be me without that?
Yeah. So it's said in Enneagram circles that the core fear of the 3 is that they're valueless, that they have no value. But another way to put that is, and this would be a source of grief, is irrelevance. Right? The feeling that I no longer matter. I've had the trappings, or whether it's your job title or your accomplishments, if you've over-identified with them, man, irrelevance is hard. It's really hard.
Well, now it's like, what's fascinating is I'm 45, second half of life. What I'm finding is irrelevance is actually the gateway. Things that I had been chasing, relevance, the things I had been chasing. And again, some of it was in such desire to do good and help people. But now it's in the sense of, I want to walk that long road of faithful obedience. I don't have the same yearning and ambition for relevance that I once did. And I think that's been new. That's been a new piece that has felt almost awkward in my own skin a little bit, but I feel like it's been the most healthy thing for me. And that's what I think the desert really taught me.
Yeah, this is what you're describing in my mind sounds a little bit like, well, and I think in the spiritual life, this is a really healthy place to go, but it is super uncomfortable, which is ego deflation, right? The sense of the manufactured self, right? Not your true self, but your manufactured self. And the ego is such a needy little creature. It's a very insecure, needy little creature. And it just, you have an experience of the ego being punctured and then deflating. It's pretty tough, but it's really hard for 3s. Did you find yourself desperately trying to find a new job or anything, a new identity that would bolster the ego and the sense of self? Or did you just surrender to the desert? I mean, I have to imagine part of you was like, okay, like starting to scramble.
Yeah, no, definitely. There was this game we used to always play as kids called Bigger and Better. And you start with like a paperclip, go to someone's house and say, hey, can I trade this paperclip for something bigger and better? And, by the end of, 2 hours, you might have someone gave me a VW Bug. It didn't work, but I got, but I think that was kind of how my mind worked. Where can I go from Chicago that can make this season make sense? Where can I go that's bigger and better? Where can I go that's just, I can thrive, I can soar, like that I don't have to deal with this old pain anymore. And that's what I was feeling leading up to being awakened with that go to the desert and wait for instructions. And I just thought it was going to be a metaphorical desert. I didn't think it was going to be literal, but going to the desert really was me recognizing if I just jump into something new right now, I'm going to transfer pain. I'm going to transfer my distrust. I need to heal. And this was so public. This was just out there. I just need time to step back, which again was that irrelevance, which is hard in itself in a different kind of way, but also healing as well.
Yeah. So you go to the desert, you wait instructions. I think I know what they probably were, but tell me what they are.
Yeah. So the concept for me was I needed to learn how to grieve, and kind of grieve, breathe, receive kind of became all centered around Holy Weekend and, Friday being in grief, Silent Saturday, just trying to get yourself through grief. And then the surprise of Sunday, realizing that even when Jesus returns, Thomas wants to feel the holes in his hands. Like he's with grief. It just carries it differently. And I think for me, it was learning it's okay to feel this. It's okay just to process this. It's okay to be a little bit out of control. And I think that's what threes hate, is to be out of control. I mean, I had to even go for the last 20 years, I've done therapy, and it's always at Monday at 11 a.m. because it gave me the most amount of time before Sunday to put it all back in the box and compartmentalize just in my subconscious. And so to try to constantly be controlling my feelings and sadness and emotion, I think just to have that time just to open it up and be out of control was actually really, really good. 2, I ended up hiking the Camino, and one day I got lost on the Camino, and it's hard to get lost because you're just following yellow arrows and yellow shells. But when I regained the group later that night, we were talking, and I was just processing, hate being out of control, hate being lost. And my friend John Huckins just said, Steve, if you never get lost, you can never be found. And I think part of what I found in the desert was the surprise to receive something that was more than just achievement, something that a different kind of peace. People came up to me after and were like, even the way you teach, it's weightier. It's just like I had gone through this process that I think helped shape me, inform me. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I'm grateful because I think it actually saved me from really probably becoming some sociopath, as a 3, in his early 50s.
So here's a danger, right? And just tell me what you think, because I've seen similar things with the other 3s, right? And I want to know what your strategy is for avoiding this pitfall.
Okay.
So 3s will often have an experience that in a real or perceived way feels like a failure. Then they leverage the experience and repackage the experience. And it could be in the form of a book or a podcast or something, to almost say, okay, well, now I've learned all this great stuff from this, and I'm going to leverage that to be the next, I'm going to be this guy now. You know what I mean? I used to laugh. We used to have a guy in a 12-step group I was in, and he was a pastor who got a D, lost his job, and a bunch of other things. And it was a really public, nasty thing, and he ended up in these rooms of recovery, thank gosh, but within literally about 4 weeks, he was like the go-to guy for recovery. And I'm like, and then he starts talking about wanting to write a book about, his journey down into the depths and out, right? Blah, blah, blah. And it was almost like, so there's always a tendency on the 3's part, like, how can I control the narrative, spin it so that I look even better than I did before things went sideways? Yep. Do you know what I mean?
Oh.
So like, and I'm not saying you're doing that, right?
Yeah.
I've had 3s on the show that did do that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anthony, am I right about that? Where it's like,
100%.
My gosh, like this guy has repackaged this thing to make himself the new winner, that even better than he was before, right? Yeah. So how do you avoid that as a 3? Because what you've been given is a severe mercy. The severe mercy is the complete collapse of this worldview, and it's a safe bottom, actually, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel good, feels like crap, all that stuff, but it's a fairly safe bottom, right? You're not losing your health, you didn't lose your marriage, okay. Now, how do you ensure that, it's like, I'm not going to make this part of my great guy resume?
Yep. Yeah, that's a hard question, Ian. I mean, I think I really wrestled because I think there's some people who actually believe that to be true about me, you know?
Do you?
And yeah, I think so. I think at any time that you kind of share about an experience and they hear about it, I think is this person just grifting? Is this person just is trying to make himself look better? You know? And I think this wasn't like a step and a how to get through and get to the other side and get a better job. This was just me trying to find some light in the dark. You know, that's what the cover is. It's just when I'd come back home from hiking early mornings and the sun was just peeking up there. My wife had these like gifts from her grandma that would just hang, and it would create these just beautiful colors, and it just would just be on the walls. And I just was like, I just need that. I just need that in my life right now. And the more that I was talking with other people, the more I was talking with guys, especially, the more I was realizing no one taught us how to grieve. We find ourselves at one point of our life, usually somewhere between 38 and 43, when we're entering second half of life, when a parent has died, we're not where we thought we would be in our career, our body's changing, our drive has changed, we're not where we are financially, where we want to be, there's something happening in our family or marriage or kids. And now what? What do I do with that? And so it just, for me, all of that, just wrestling with my ego, wrestling with the sadness, trying to create space to say, hey, just, it's okay to feel this. It's okay. But I'm not like, I'm the guy who can teach you about grief. I'm not like the grief guy. This is just one dude's story of how he went to the desert and what the desert taught him and what he discovered about himself and about a faith that was strong enough to hold him. And so, but I took probably 6 years after it happened is when the book came out.
Yeah.
And
that's really telling, actually.
Yeah.
Usually, like, this happened to me. I'm leading an Enneagram workshop, and this happens happens pretty often. I'll be leading a 2-day workshop. At the end of it, a guy will come up, hey man, how do I get certified? And I'll be like, okay, that's pretty fast. And then he's like, how do I get certified in the Enneagram? Because I got this, and then tell me about like what, because I had this idea that maybe I could become certified and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I go, he's a 3. Like, it's just like, I got a 3 on my hands right here. I got a live one, right? It's like, how do I take this, repackage it, retool it, remarket it, do this, come on, get a mailing list, do that, get the whole thing. I mean, the guy's worked it out. He probably hasn't heard half of what I said because he's been planning. He has been doing a business plan while I was teaching. You know what I mean? But he was just hearing key points and going, oh yeah, well, that could be, and so I think when you have an experience like this, I do watch the timeline. Like if you had written this book a year after, I'd have been like, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't think this has happened yet. Yep. 6 years, I'm like, okay, because so oftentimes, and it's not just 3s, there's a couple other types that can do this too, right? And it's actually too a spiritual bypass, right? It's like, I don't want to feel these feelings, so I'm going to flip this thing fast and still leverage what reputation I have out there to further my aims and ambitions, right? So that makes me, not that I was ever judging you, but I listen to people and I watch and I go, and so when I see time, it comforts me. It gives me more of a sense of, okay, this is probably legit. Like you gave it time, right? So how has, if someone said to you to give a brief description of what grief has beautifully created in you, what would you say it was?
What you said about the institution and the connection to a person, that was my life, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. Then there was a lot of beauty in it, but there was some stuff that was out of whack. And I remember talking to this trauma and grief therapist, and it was pretty early in my journey, and an opportunity to go work somewhere that was bigger and better, so I thought maybe could just take the pain away. And I was processing it with this therapist, and she's like, let me hear your whole story. I say the whole story, and she goes, Steve, I just want you to know you're a victim, and your innocence was victimized. But she's like, that's not the most interesting thing to me. The most interesting thing is, why are you drawn to narcissists? Because if you don't answer that question, you as a 3 is going to constantly keep repeating this again and again and again until you actually can get to a point where you recognize that you are beloved. And I could say, oh yeah, totally. But I didn't know what that felt like. I didn't know. I mean, if I messed up, the contempt for myself, if I let people down, if I failed in some capacity, man, it would haunt me. Now I just wake up and go, well, what great screw up am I going to have today? There's a bit of like this sense of the death to an ego is actually, there's something about that has been really redemptive to realize, okay, there's still work to be done. There's still stuff that God wants to do, and there's still stuff I'm learning. And so I think that's what grief has been able to teach me is in the change, it's actually going to be okay. It's going to be okay. If you let it do what it needs to do and you have that surrendered will, I think you're going to be okay.
So beautiful, and a great place for us to stop, because I think that's as good a message as we get our hands on. I'm talking again with our good friend Steve Carter, author of the book Grieve, Breathe, Receive, Finding a Faith Strong Enough to Hold Us. Everybody, go get your hands on this book. And I know, as I said at the beginning of the show, Christmas is a weird time, and sometimes it surfaces grief in ways that we don't anticipate. It could be grief about a relationship you never had with one of your parents, and it becomes particularly poignant at this time of year, or any number of things. It's a funny backdrop for grief to surface. And I think this book might be of great service to you to check it out. Steve, how else can people learn about what you're doing, brother?
Yeah, it's stevecarter.org, or on social media, it's just at Steve Ryan Carter.
Beautiful. Well, man, thanks for being on today. What a joy to have you.
Definitely. It's such an honor. Thanks so much, guys.
And for all of you listening, I'm going to do it again this week. Be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. Until next time.
Sweet.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Oh, thank you so much, guys.